Alright, it's not August yet, but I just kind of love Final Fantasy VIII music, so let's have that going. And a gentle reminder before we start this video that this video is about the Valouch review. It is not about anything else that is currently going on in the global community, so please try and keep it on topic to talking about this unit. Alright, so Valouch, a character that we've known about since this side story at the beginning of the month, and he's the main, basically one of the main characters featured in it. And now he's here in the game, a wind elemental UR character who is 90 cost and non-limited for anybody who is curious, who is a permanent addition to the game. Question is he good or is he not good? Well, pros wise, I have to say that this is one of the units that I specifically like to see being put in the game. A more unique experimental type unit is the way I describe him, in the sense that he is working on some new ideas that are not necessarily going to make him a completely reliable piece, or a completely reliable unit in all pieces of content, but he is potentially really good against very specific teams. And that is definitely to be noted. I do think that he is a specialist in the teams that he will be good against, in the content he will be good against. But he does have some potential to also just be good in general. But we'll talk a little bit more about that. And last but not least, one of the things that relates to the first two pros is that he has a critical leverage mechanic. In other words, his entire kit not his entire kit, but a good part of his kit, and the more interesting part of his kit, essentially relies on getting critical hits against enemies, and that is both a big strength to him and a big weakness, because in the con side, he's essentially very weak to physical attacks. And taking a look at his critical rate, which is going to be a big factor in whether or not this unit is good, it might just be too low to be incredibly reliable. So again, maybe the way I generally look at this unit as kind of talking about him is I think that he is a really interesting tempo unit. If he does get on a roll and just keeps getting critical hits, he might just be absolutely capable of murdering a good portion of people. On the other hand, if he falls flat, he might just fall really flat, and that can make the investment of resources potentially maybe a little bit dangerous. So looking at his stats, as you can see here from the current Mage team that I am running, essentially what we're looking at, about 6,000 HP, which is pretty good for a Mage. About 1,400 magic with Typhoon summon, and defense not very good. This leads into the fact that he is particularly weaker against physical damage dealing units, but his spirit stat is very good, so he should be pretty darn good against other mages. Speed is nice, dexterity is alright, and last but not least, luck. This might be a sticking point in the future, but and of course, taking a look at what he has for resistances, you can get a good look here. But as always, one of the primary focuses is damage types, and as you can see here, pretty strong against slash. Now his base resistances, which I'm just trying to find where they are, slashing is at 15%, piercing is at 5%, strike is -5%, and shooting is 5%. So as you can see, with the current build, it hasn't exactly changed too terribly much. But he has a good spirit stat, so I'm not really worried about magic damage. It also doesn't have a negative value on it, even without equipment, so that's perfectly fine. And he can resist against some other sword type units, which is good, but gunners, Barrett could be a natural counter to this unit. Even with some, shooting resistance, I don't think it's necessarily strong enough to maybe counterattack against some of the really powerful ice units out there. And I think even units like Gilgamesh could still pose a very serious threat to this character, not only by elemental advantage, but just as a physical based unit. I think that this unit definitely has some weak spots against other units. The question is, though, how often are you able to see ice units around? And the answer is, on the JP side, I feel like not very right now. I don't see a ton of other ice units in content like Arena and Guild War, but maybe that will change. And it could change and very easily bring balance to this unit. So a balanced unit is always generally nice. Alright, and now let's get into jobs. We have 3 jobs to talk about, and we're going to try and talk about them relatively quick. But before that, I'll just mention his master ability is a 15% HP increase and some extra spirit. Alright, so he has 3 jobs. Third job, White Mage, is the one we're going to talk about first. Protect, Curing, Shell, all the stuff that you would naturally expect, as well as Doom Invalidation from a support ability and Regenerator as his counter. But the big note here is that he has both Arise and Raise in his kit, meaning that his White Mage is all support, and it is really good support. Having access to those abilities for a unit that already has incredibly high faith and should, has a magic damage dealer, always have high faith. Raise and Arise are 2 very good things that can be useful in a lot of pieces of content and can keep the rest of the team going. Do you want this unit necessarily healing as opposed to damage dealing? No, not necessarily, but having Arise for emergencies is a very strong ability, so let's just keep going on. Next up is Messenger, his secondary job, and honestly, it's Messenger at this point. Sure, hit abilities, the confusion effect ability for enemies surrounding him. He has the move and jump increase, which is great for mobility. He has the counter ability that reduces damage potentially, and of course his support abilities that increase magic power and resistance to mental and soil attributes. So those are good options for how you want to build him. And he has the large AoE. He has damage abilities. It is what it is. Messenger at this point is a pretty well-known job, slash Kododama, I should say, is the Japanese name, if I haven't already mentioned it. I think that it's just a strong addition. It gives his kit a little more flexibility and potentially against evasion units. So all of that is just good. Moving on. And last but not least, okay, there's a little bit of I've noted before that it's essentially Magic Swordsman is the title of this job, and I think it's the title that most people have landed on who have done translation. But I just want to note that when I did it in Google Translate earlier, just to see some more information about abilities, guess what? It came out as Demon Swordsman, which I think is a much cooler title. Anyway, Demon Swordsman is a job that you will not feel too bad about changing over for White Mage or Messenger, depending on the content, because it is a job that essentially only loses 1 ability, a sword ability that is a 3-use 20 AP ability that also, if a critical hit happens, works with enhancements on the enemies that it's targeting. It's also a plus AoE ability, which is, potentially just really good. But I find it interesting that he essentially just loses these 2. This one getting, affecting enhancements in such a way, and this one affecting bravery. But is it important for the fact of how well he can critical? We're going to talk about that, don't you worry. But yeah, I think that if you were to give up these 2 abilities for White Mage abilities or Messenger abilities, I think you will end out coming in generally more favorable. And while we're here, excuse me, we're going to talk about his counter ability, which is particularly, I think, just a pretty nice ability. It is a first strike counterattack, and that actually does more damage as Valouch's HP decreases. Now, first of all, you'll note incredibly limited range here, so it's not going to be the most overpowered thing ever. But considering that his weakness is against physical units, and physical units, might come in close to him because the AI is sometimes really dumb, if this unit has taken a good amount of damage and has not been able to heal before he gets hit, he could potentially hit the enemy that is attacking him, kill them, and then, he survives and the enemy's dead before the enemy gets their attack off. That's really interesting, and that's really fun, and I really love the flavor of that. The only problem essentially is that its range is incredibly narrow, And the chances of this happening with how many AoE and range abilities there are, again, like I said, I do think that Valouch is a very tempo-orientated character in the sense that he is, you know, in the right situation, he might just be unstoppable. But if that situation doesn't go his way, well, he may just end up dead. Taking a look at the supports he gets a quickness up and mental penetration rate up, which is great for a damage dealer, and HP up and mental increase, which is just good against other mages. So all of that is pretty strong. Looking at the main part of his kit, he does have a few other things to note. Damaging ability that can reduce attack and magic power on a single enemy for 3 turns. Don't have the Wotv calc numbers yet, but probably is going to be sitting around a 40% debuff, as that seems to be pretty standard right now. He has a buff ability for himself and units around him that increase slashing attack power, as well as critical rate for 3 turns each. And gotta say, this ability I think is actually really just good, because you can fit this guy in with a slash team. You could fit him in incredibly well with 2B. You can get him in with Cloud, since Cloud likes to be doing critical abilities. This unit does work with a lot of other slash units, and that might be a very redeeming factor for him. But this buff is almost essential for him. You always want to be making sure that this is a priority in his AI, because you need those criticals to really land some of the other abilities we're going to look at. Not forgetting even the ones that we've talked about in his sub job already. He has a anti-magic ability that essentially gives him a barrier that basically prevents a certain amount of damage. Again, have not tested it yet, so I don't know exactly how much damage, but if it's anything like Jaden's TMR, it's probably around 2,500 HP. And if Wotv Calc would love to give those numbers out, or find those numbers, that would be fantastic. Hennen Sword is a neat little ability because it actually allows that tempo style gameplay. Basically, it's a damage ability. I mean, it's dealing large base damage, but the big kicker here is that it increases his own CT a small amount whenever he does end up getting a critical. So if you were to pair this guy with Cloud, Cloud does his buff, he does his buff, and then he uses this ability and he gets a critical. Not only is he regenerating AP, he's also potentially regenerating or getting a little bit of an advantage against the enemy. Again, neat tempo-orientated playstyle. And here we go. This ability is his big job level 25, 3 uses, 25 AP, magic dependent damage that basically reduces the amount reaction abilities, essentially counter abilities, if you will. A very good option, just because there are very strong counters out there. There's Black Witch Helena, or Black Robe, or Black Robed Witch, Black Witch Robed Witch, Black. I don't know. I'm just mixing up words at this point. Or, you know, Yuna or anything like that. Don't underestimate counter ability ceiling, especially in a game where PvP against other units with strong counters is a thing you do. This unit has that style of tempo, and this is removing tempo from your enemy and potentially just giving it to him. So, you know, you run kind of like a messenger who buffs his movement, he gets him really close, maybe dupes the enemy into getting it really close. Then his counter goes off, but their counter has already been removed, so he just kind of gets an advantage against other enemies and uses that. Alright, and take one last good look at his stats, and we're going to just head over to the banner real quick. I do believe I have to download data. Apologies. And we're going to take a look, of course, at his limit burst, because limit burst animations are always really cool. We'll show off the range that you can see here and the cost. Now let's take a look at what this does. It is basically a damage limit burst, as most limit bursts are. Sorry. That also has a chance of paralyzing enemies. Very cool animation and everything like that. Fire-based one with a wind character. Okay. Yeah, the limit burst seems strong, and if I can just find Truss Mastery. had it earlier. But if not, I'm just going to have to just pull it up. Here we go. Alright, so the last thing is a Truss Mastery, which is always an important part in determining a unit's value, right? 408 HP, 8 critical, 6 defense, 14 spirit, fairly good statted. Taking a look at it, it increases your own faith and increases magic and dexterity for 3 turns. So that gives you a good idea of what this is going to be done. It can be used 2 times. You know, it seems like a pretty good piece of equipment for mages. And whether or not it can be equipped by all types of mages, don't know at this point. Again, we'll wait and see the Wotv Cal. But my general thoughts about Valouch is what an interesting character. Do I think he's actually the most amazing character ever? Maybe not this time. This is one of the characters that it makes me a little worried about some of his stats, that maybe his criticals or his weapon isn't necessarily going to support dealing as much criticals as one would want, and he's really depending on those buffs. And sometimes you just don't get a chance to get those buffs. And what, you know, if he just essentially comes down to luck, some people may really enjoy that play style. That seems to be the way Wind is going, but Wind could essentially use a bit of a luck boost vision card, or, you know, just, you know, a little bit of a critical rate avoidance card just to get Wind up to speed. It could come next week. It could happen. But regardless, it feels still like he is not necessarily the best investment, because I think that it might be just a little too high risk and reward for most players who are playing the game. Obviously not everyone, as some people really enjoy that playstyle. So if you really enjoy a kind of more risky, tempo-orientated character, then I think you're going to end up enjoying Valouch a fair bit, because he really does seem like a, you know, a neat little critical mechanic. It turned out to be better than, you know, I was disappointed initially when Clouds didn't work the exact way I thought, but having used Cloud for a good amount of time, I have to say that Cloud ended up being way better than I thought. Let's just pass a whole bunch of turns, because there's one thing I have not figured out yet. The missing piece of the puzzle. This is one of the things that I was the most curious about AP start, and as you can see, 37 AP is not a ton, but we also did get to see his barrier ability here. Since this is a level 120 unit, we're going to talk about his EX as the final point while we're watching this video. But you can see there that his barrier is about 3,500 HP, meaning that with roughly about 6,000, you're looking at about 9,000 HP for this character. Alright, so what does he get for enhancements in his EX job? The barrier essentially will prevent magic damage to you over a certain amount, so we figured out that. Regen effect that gradually recovers HP over 3 turns. Kind of interested where this ability is supposed to fit in, whether or not, and there you go, you kind of saw some of his damage output right there, but kind of interested to when you should use this barrier. As you can see, the AI didn't use the critical ability. It essentially snapped right to the protection ability, which is good. I mean, it keeps him alive, but now essentially he has a regen effect at the start of battle as opposed to having a critical effect at the start of battle. And since so many of his abilities kind of want that critical going, so he can end up getting more out of his kit, it makes me a little worried that his AI may not be proper prioritizing what would essentially be good. Ideally, you'd want the critical one to hit first, or, you know, I guess if the enemy was a little bit further away. I feel like you'd want critical to be set up first, barrier set up second. Could be wrong, but usually it feels like maps are far enough apart that that would be better. Second ability, the slashing buff that he gets also gives a increase in critical rate and spirit. for those units for 3 turns. And the last one is his new ability, Magic Dependent Damage Medium, absorbs part of the damage to targets within range. So, yeah, that's his EX. Now that we've seen the full thing, he has a lot of self-sustain, and that is good. I am curious about how much, physical units will just murder him. But overall, I would say, what would I give this unit as? I've thought about this, but now I'm kind of doubling back on what I think. I think that I would end up giving this unit as a risky, but potentially really powerful, in the sense of kind of like a Howlet, interestingly enough. I think that the unit has some really amazing, support, obviously, with the White Mage there. But even in his own kit, and especially getting him to 120 with that healing ability, there is some good stuff. There is potentially support for other sword units as kind of a backup White Mage, which is, never not necessarily unwanted. I think that this is a good unit. I think that he's strong. If you are really looking for that another critical based unit, and you kind of like rolling the dice a little bit. I mean, you all play gacha games, so kind of telling. I think this unit is potentially really interesting, but otherwise than that, Globalers might want to wait a little bit and see if JP is really able to get a lot of use and he ends up overperforming before you start putting him on your I'm saving for this unit no matter what list. But he does have some synergy with Cloud and Howlet and 2B, and Thief is a wind unit. Sure, why not? We'll throw it all in there. And other wind units and other sword units. So there's a lot of potential good matchups for him, and we'll just have to wait and see. I'll keep an eye on him, but I would give him interesting but risky as a overall style of approval. If you're not looking for that, then just move on. Nothing to see here. Anyway, thanks for watching. Take care. See you next time.